welcome to the Plain Books Podcast. So think about this for a second. In English, when you say I am, you're kind of frozen in time.
Right. You exist as a completely static object.
Exactly, like A equals B. But I was reading that in ancient Sanskrit, the exact same phrase means you are actively mutating into something new. You aren't just existing, you're becoming.
It's wild, isn't it? Just the architecture of a single word completely alters the universe you inhabit.
It really does. And today, we're dedicating this entire episode of the podcast to exploring exactly that. How the microscopic mechanics of language, the verbs, the punctuation, the rhythm of your syllables, fundamentally change how you communicate. And honestly, how you understand your own mind.
Yeah, and we're looking at all of this through the lens of this book, Good Writing, 36 Ways to Improve Your Sentences, by Neal Allen and Anne Lamott.
Right. And what makes this text so utterly fascinating isn't just the rules it lays out, it's the friction that actually created those rules.
Oh, absolutely. That friction is basically the beating heart of the book, because you have these two authors who come from entirely different literary universes.
Yeah, completely different worlds.
Right. So Neal Allen comes from the strict, objective, fiercely rule-bound world of newspaper journalism. He literally calls himself a hack writer.
Which I love, by the way. So unpretentious.
Totally. I mean, he cut his teeth on police blotters, town hall meetings, tight deadlines. In that world, every single inch of column space costs money. So you don't have the luxury of being, overly precious with your words. You deliver the facts, you hit hard, and you get out.
Right. And then sitting across the editing desk from him is his wife, Anne Lamott, who is, she's a celebrated literary icon.
Exactly. And her world is subjective, deeply soulful, spiritually inquisitive, and famously rule-breaking. She writes about faith and addiction and the messy realities of the human condition.
Her prose just sort of meanders and sings. So this book is the result of these two wildly different philosophies just colliding.
Yeah. You can almost picture them sitting at the kitchen table, arguing over a single comma, fighting for their respective literary values, and then eventually harmonizing to figure out what actually makes a sentence work.
And that collaboration forces us to look at writing under a microscope. Because, we're conditioned by high school English classes to focus on the macro, right? Overarching plot, the grand argument.
Right, the thematic resonance.
Exactly. But this book insists that we look at the micro and uses this beautiful, very tactile analogy. She says, sentences are the individual beads that you use to assemble the necklace of your narrative.
It's a great image.
I love that image, but let me push back on it for a second. If I'm writing a crucial email to my team, or putting together a massive presentation for work, I'm focused on the big picture. I want them to understand my grand vision. So why should you, or why should anyone listening right now, obsess over something as small and seemingly pedantic as a single sentence?
Because the reader doesn't experience your grand vision all at once. They experience it linearly, bead by bead, sentence by sentence.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. If you're stringing together a necklace to give to someone, and the overall design is brilliant, but the individual beads are cracked or cloudy or sharply misshapen, what happens when they run their fingers over it?
It feels terrible. It might even fall apart in their hands.
Exactly. A sentence isn't just an invisible vehicle for carrying data from your brain to mine. It's the physical, psychological experience of reading. Obsessing over a sentence is actually obsessing over the reader's experience of your mind.
Wow.
Yeah. If your sentences are clumsy, your reader feels clumsy. But if your sentences are sharp and propulsive, your reader feels intelligent and energized.
Okay, so if the sentences are the individual beads on this narrative necklace, then the verbs have to be the string. They're the engine holding everything together and providing that forward momentum.
Absolutely, the engine of the whole thing.
And Allen and Lamott start right out of the gate with what Neal calls the Dalio rule, which comes straight from his smoky, high-pressure newspaper days. It's named after his old editor, Sam DeLeo.
Yeah, and DeLeo apparently looked at a young, probably terrified Neal Allen and gave him the ultimate directive. He just said, write with your verbs.
Just write with your verbs. It sounds so simple.
It sounds simple, but it is the single most transformative piece of advice a writer can get. The premise is that weak verbs, words like walked or looked or stood, are just limp fish lying dead on the page.
Limp fish. I love that.
They have no inherent energy, so they force you to rely on adverbs to do the work. You end up writing, he walked slowly and tiredly, or she looked angrily.
Right, but a specific muscular verb does all the heavy lifting for you. So instead of walked slowly and tiredly, you just use trudged.
Exactly. Or instead of looked angrily, you use glared. When you use a precise verb like trudged or malingered or strutted, you instantly delete the need for adverbs. You completely streamline the sentence.
And Anne shares this hilarious, very visceral example from her own life about her dog, Bodhi.
Oh, the turkey story.
Yes. So initially, she might have written that Bodhi ate the Thanksgiving turkey. But ate transmits a dry, boring fact. It doesn't capture the reality of a dog getting into a holiday feast.
Not even close.
Right. When she revised that thought, she realized Bodhi didn't just eat the turkey. He devoured, gobbled, wolfed down, and inhaled it.
You literally have a physical reaction to those words. The dog ate the turkey is a police report. The dog inhaled the turkey is a cinematic event.
You can see the frantic speed, the grease flying around, the sheer gluttony of it. And this is precisely why the authors urge us to brutally question our use of verbs that merely indicate being and having.
Words like is, was, has, and had.
Yeah. They argue these are the absolute weakest verbs in the English language because they're inherently static. Like if you write, he was tired, you have brought your narrative momentum to a dead, screeching halt.
You've immobilized both the subject and the reader. You're simply stating a condition. There's no action, no movement, no friction.
But hold on, I have to stop you there because this feels like a total paradox to me.
Yeah.
To be is literally the basis of existence. I mean, I think, therefore I am. To exist is the most fundamental human state. So how can the very foundation of our reality be considered a weak verb? Why are we being told to avoid the essence of being alive?
That is the perfect question. And the answer dives into a massive philosophical divide between Western materialism and Eastern metaphysics.
Oh, wow. Okay, let's get into it.
So in English, and in Western thought generally, to be is entirely static. You simply are. Like we said earlier, it's an equation, A equals B. John is a baker. The sky is blue. It implies a fixed, unchanging state.
Right.
But let's look at Sanskrit, one of the oldest languages on Earth. Sanskrit actually has two different root verbs for to be. One is as, which is static, much like our English is, but the other root is bu.
B-H-U.
Yes, bu. When bu is used in sacred ancient texts like the Bhagavad Gita, it doesn't just mean being in a static sense. It implies becoming. Exactly. It represents an active, ceaseless state of flux and development. If you were to say, I am a man, using the root bu, it carries a hidden, profound meaning. It means I'm becoming a man, or a man is becoming me.
That's incredible.
It implies your existence is an ongoing action, not a finished product. English just lacks that built-in metaphysical subtlety. So when we rely heavily on to be in our writing, we're dragging our sentences into a purely material, frozen state where nothing is changing, nothing is growing, and no one is really doing anything.
That is absolutely staggering. We're essentially trapped by the philosophical limitations of our own grammar.
We really are.
And what's so incredible is that you can actually track a writer actively fighting against this limitation. In this book, Good Writing, 36 Ways to Improve Your Sentences by Neal Allen and Anne Lamott, they analyze what is arguably the most famous speech in the history of the English language, Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy.
It's the perfect case study. If you look closely at the first 14 lines of that soliloquy, Shakespeare uses the verb to be or its variants 9 times.
9 times in 14 lines.
9 times. Now ask yourself, what is Hamlet doing in that exact moment of the play?
He's completely stuck. He's paralyzed. He's standing there contemplating suicide, trapped between the impulsive emotional reactions of his childhood and the grim responsibilities of adulthood. He literally cannot make a decision.
Exactly. He is entirely static, and Shakespeare mirrors that psychological paralysis by flooding the dialogue with the most static verb in the language, to be.
Wow.
But then right around line 15, something shifts. Hamlet says, and by opposing, end them. Suddenly, he makes a brilliant psychological course correction. He begins to mature in his reasoning right before the audience's eyes.
And his mind starts to move.
Yes. And as his mind starts to move, the verb to be almost entirely vanishes from the rest of the speech. He shifts to muscular active verbs. He talks of grunt and sweat, to bear, to fly. The language becomes propulsive because the character's mind is finally moving forward.
So Shakespeare literally uses the transition from static verbs to active verbs to show the evolution of human consciousness. That is mind-blowing.
It's Pure genius.
And it completely validates their rule about keeping your language active versus passive. We hear this rule all the time in high school. Avoid the passive voice. Don't say, the ball was thrown by Jim. Say, Jim threw the ball. The active version is undeniably punchier. But there are exceptions, aren't there? Times when breaking the rule is actually the mark of a master.
Oh, absolutely. And understanding why the exception works is what separates a good writer from a great one. You deliberately use the passive voice when you want to shift the reader's emotional focus entirely away from the actor and onto the receiver of the action.
Okay, give me an example.
The authors cite President Franklin D. Roosevelt's famous Day of Infamy speech following the attack on Pearl Harbor. FDR didn't step up to the podium and say, the Empire of Japan suddenly and deliberately attacked the United States of America.
Right, which would be the grammatically correct active way to structure the sentence.
Right, but strategically, it would have been a disaster. It would have handed the power, the agency, and the immediate focus of the sentence over to the attackers.
Oh, I see.
Instead, FDR used the passive voice. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. By making the United States the subject receiving the action, he emphasized the victims. He highlighted the shock, the violation, and the innocence of the nation, delaying the mention of the aggressor until the very end.
He used grammar to unify a wounded country. That is brilliant.
It really is.
And they mention another, completely different, but equally masterful use of the passive voice in the realm of fiction. The opening lines of Douglas Adams' science fiction comedy, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh, this is one of my favorites. Adams writes, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, in the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move.
The universe was created. Passive voice. He intentionally omits the actor. He doesn't say God created the universe or a Big Bang created the universe.
Exactly. By using the passive voice, he establishes this incredibly dry, cosmic irony. It treats the birth of all existence as a casual, bureaucratic error that just sort of happened to us.
It's a perfect use of a grammatical rule break to establish a comedic tone. But speaking of rules and tone, there is another strict verb rule they bring over from the journalism world that writers often struggle with, the rule of attribution.
Ah, yes.
When you are writing dialogue, you should almost exclusively stick with the word said.
Oh, this is so hard for people. Neal Allen points out that writers, especially newer ones, get desperate to show off. They think using said over and over is repetitive, so they break out the thesaurus.
The dreaded thesaurus.
Yes. They use words like chuckled, asserted, ranted, bellowed, or avowed. Like, I'm leaving you, she asserted. I'll be back, he chuckled. It just feels so clunky.
It feels clunky because it's authorial intrusion, right? The rule is that the word said is essentially invisible to the human eye. It functions as a simple mechanical connector, like a nail in a floorboard. You don't look at the nail, you just walk on the floor.
That's exactly it. When you use said, the reader's attention stays exactly where it belongs on the quote itself. When you use chuckled or asserted, you are stepping in front of your own characters. You're trying to interpret the quote for the reader, which basically implies you don't trust your own dialogue to carry the emotion.
You're telling the reader how to feel instead of letting them feel it. Which brings us perfectly to the next major philosophy explored in this episode about this book, Good Writing, 36 Ways to Improve Your Sentences, by Neal Allen and Anne Lamott. Once you've built a powerful engine of active, specific verbs, you have to look at the actual vocabulary you are choosing.
Right, the actual words.
And their overwhelming advice here is to cut the clutter, trust the earthy, and brutally suppress the desperate urge to show off.
Rule 5 is literally just don't show off. It sounds simple, but it requires a massive amount of ego checking. As writers, as professionals, as humans, we desperately want to be perceived as intelligent. We want people to know we have a robust vocabulary.
Well, Anne Lamott shares a deeply humbling anecdote about this exact instinct. She had just published her first novel, Hard Laughter. It was an intensely personal book dealing with her father's brain cancer, weaving profound sadness with this dark gallows humor. The very first review of her entire career arrived from Publishers Weekly.
And it was a total hit job.
It was brutal. The reviewer explicitly tore into her prose, calling it out for its show-offy overkill.
I mean, imagine reading that about your first published work. She admits it completely devastated her, but she also admits that the phrase show-offy overkill echoed in her mind for the rest of her career through her next 19 books. It became this necessary poison.
It taught her to relentlessly cut those flagrant, desperate efforts to sound more erudite or charming than she actually was.
There is a quote from the French philosopher Pascal that captures this perfectly. He said, "Everything that is written merely to please the author is worthless." Think about the emails you receive at work. Think about the corporate jargon. When someone writes that they want to utilize key synergies to holistically optimize our paradigm,
You just roll your eyes.
you roll your eyes. You instantly know they aren't trying to communicate with you. They are trying to impress you.
And readers, whether they're reading a novel or a corporate memo, are highly sensitive to authenticity. If they sense that you're parading your vocabulary, they lose trust in you as a guide. You break the seamless dream of the narrative because suddenly they are no longer looking at the world you built, they're looking at you, the author, waving your arms for attention.
And this psychology is exactly why Allen and Lamott strongly advise preferring Anglo-Saxon words over Latinate words.
Let's unpack the history behind that because it is fascinating.
It really is. The English language is essentially a mud. In 1066, the Normans, who spoke French, which is a Latin-based language, conquered England. They became the ruling class, the aristocracy, the lawyers, the royalty.
Right, and the commoners, the peasants working the fields, spoke Anglo-Saxon, which is a Germanic language.
Right.
So we ended up with two parallel vocabularies living side by side.
Exactly. The Anglo-Saxon words are short, physical, punchy, and grounded in dirt and sweat. Words like end, sweaty, house, or crash.
And the Latinate words are the ones the ruling class used. They are academic, abstract, multisyllabic, and distant. Words like terminate, perspiring, residence, or collision.
Right. Latinate words speak purely to the intellect. They are highly precise, which is why science, medicine, and law rely on them. But Anglo-Saxon words speak to the body, the blood, and the heart.
But wait, I have to ask, we spend years in school. We read massive volumes of literature. We study for the SATs. We do all this specifically to expand our vocabularies and learn these complex $50 Latinate words. Are you telling me that to be a good communicator, I need to throw out my $50 words and revert back to using nickel words?
Yes. If your goal is to make the reader actually feel something, reading isn't just an intellectual data transfer. It's a physical and emotional experience. If you use a $50 word that jolts the reader out of the story, you have failed. Anne tells a wonderful story about reading a novel and coming across the word petrichor on the very first page.
Petrichor. It's a gorgeous word. It means the distinct, earthy smell when rain finally falls on dry soil.
It is a beautiful word. But Anne had to stop reading. She had to put the book down, pull out her phone, and look the word up. And she makes a vital psychological point here. If the reader has to stop and look something up, they feel dumb.
Oh, nobody likes feeling dumb.
Right. And when a reader feels dumb, the immersive dream of the story is shattered. They don't sit there admiring your massive vocabulary. They resent you for making them feel inadequate.
There is a brilliant quote by the novelist E.L. Doctorow that they reference in the book. He said that good writing is supposed to evoke sensation. It is not supposed to merely inform the reader that it is raining. It is supposed to give the reader the physical feeling of being rained upon.
Exactly. A $50 Latinate word tells your intellect about the precipitation. A nickel Anglo-Saxon word makes you shiver from the cold drops hitting your neck.
To make the reader feel that rain, you have to get rid of the clutter that insulates them from the physical world. And the most common form of clutter is the crutch word, especially the word very. In this book, Good Writing, 36 Ways to Improve Your Sentences, by Neal Allen and Anne Lamott, they remind us that adding very to a word almost always weakens it.
It is the ultimate lazy modifier. If you say someone is very tired, you haven't given me an image. You've just given me a weak word with a booster attached to it. They quote Robin Williams' character, John Keating, in the movie Dead Poets Society. He tells his students, "A man is not very tired. He's exhausted. Don't use very sad. Use morose."
And Mark Twain had the ultimate practical advice for dealing with this. He advised writers that whenever they feel the urge to type the word very, they should type the word damn instead.
I love this trick.
It's so good. So instead of, "It was a very cold day," you're right, "it was a damn cold day." Twain said that your editor will inevitably cross out the word damn, and you will be left with a perfectly good, strong sentence. It was a cold day.
It's such a brilliant practical trick. Strip away the verys, the reallys, the basicallys, and the literallys, and you're left with the core, load-bearing words.
And if you truly want to master those core words, they argue you need to understand their etymology. You need to know where the words come from.
Because knowing the deep history of a word acts as a psychological anchor for your writing. These words aren't just arbitrary mouth sounds we invented yesterday. They carry thousands of years of physical history.
The section on the etymology of writing absolutely floored me. Take the word write. It comes from ancient Proto-Indo-European roots that literally mean to rip, to tear, or to carve. Yeah. Writing, at its inception, was the physical act of taking a sharp tool and carving meaning into wood or stone. It's an act of tearing down, of removing material. But then look at the word create. It comes from an entirely different root, meaning to grow, to plant, to bring forth from the soil.
When you understand that history, it completely shifts your relationship with the blank page. Writing isn't just a mental exercise of putting things onto a page. It is a physical, sculptural act of carving away the excess, tearing down the verys and the weak verbs so that the true meaning can grow and emerge. You are carving meaning out of raw, earthly material.
And once you've carved out those raw, beautiful, earthy words, they don't just sit rigidly on the page. They unfold in time. The reader experiences them chronologically. And that brings us to the music, the pacing, and the rhythm of your prose.
Because rhythm is what carries the reader effortlessly from one sentence to the next. But to master rhythm, you first have to identify and trust your own natural voice. You can't write with someone else's rhythm.
Right. And Neal Allen introduces this wildly entertaining but deeply accurate framework where he categorizes writing voices using the members of the Beatles.
I love this framework so much. He says that writing, exactly like music, relies on melody, rhythm, and harmony. Let's break down the band. First, you have Paul McCartney. Paul is melody. In writing, a Paul relies on wit, brightness, clever metaphors, aphorisms, and charm. They write sentences that stick in your head like a pop hook.
Then you have John Lennon. John is rhythm. A John writer has drive, pulse, edge, and forward momentum. They hit you with relentless logic and raw, propulsive energy. They don't care about being pretty. They care about moving you forward.
Next is George Harrison. George is harmony. In prose, a George represents the layers, the counterpoint, the deeper, often melancholic or spiritual yearning beneath the text. They write the dense, atmospheric paragraphs that make you stare out the window and contemplate your existence.
And finally, you have Ringo Starr. Ringo is the steady, unpretentious, reliable heartbeat. A Ringo writer doesn't try to dazzle you with metaphors or crush you with philosophy. They just tell you exactly what happened, clearly and reliably, keeping the entire structure grounded.
And the profound lesson here is not that you should try to be all four Beatles at once.
Well, that'll be chaos.
Total, chaotic, overstuffed writing. The goal is to recognize your default strength and lean into it. Anne Lamott admits she is a classic Paul. She leans heavily on humor, brightness, and clever metaphors. She says she often wishes she could write like a John or a George. She looks at writers like Barbara Kingsolver or Virginia Woolf with their massive, harmonic, rhythmic drive and feels jealous.
But when she tries to emulate them, her writing falls flat. It feels fraudulent. The goal is to identify your inner Beatle and play that specific instrument as fiercely as you can.
I think this is a perfect moment for you, the listener, to do some self-reflection. Think about your own communication style. When you write a long email or pitch an idea to a client or even text your friends a story, are you a Paul? Are you constantly trying to find the witty metaphor to make them smile?
Or are you a John, using sharp rhythmic logic to relentlessly drive your point home? Maybe you are a Ringo, just providing the clear, unpretentious facts so everyone knows what's going on. Don't fight your natural voice. Amplify it.
And once you know your instrument, you can start playing with the specific mechanics of rhythm. And one of the most fascinating debates in the book is about the rule of threes versus Anne's love of twos.
Yes. In Western rhetoric, we are absolutely hammered with the idea that 3 is the magic number.
The rule of three is everywhere, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Blood, sweat, and tears. I came, I saw, I conquered. Providing 3 examples or 3 adjectives creates a satisfying enclosed rhythm. It wraps the thought up in a neat little package and signals to the reader's brain that the concept is complete.
But Anne Lamott actively argues against the tyranny of 3. She argues for the immense unsettling power of 2. She says that 3 closes the door, but 2 leaves the door wide open. It leaves the thought suspended in midair.
It's true.
She cites a quote from the legendary painter Peter Paul Rubens. He was critiquing a portrait and he exclaimed, "I don't know what I love more, the incredible headscarf, the layers, the folds."
Just two. The layers, the folds.
Exactly. If he had added a third, if he had said the layers, the folds, the texture, like it would have immediately felt like a grocery list. It would have felt resolved and intellectualized. But just two, the layers, the folds, feels like a gasp. It leaves you breathless, staring at the painting right alongside him, waiting for a resolution that never comes.
It creates a psychological void, and the reader's imagination rushes in to fill that void. That same manipulation of psychological space and time is evident in how we handle the actual length of our sentences. We're often taught to fear long sentences, right? To keep things short and punchy. But long sentences have a magnificent purpose when used correctly. The authors point to E.B. White, who wrote a famous 107-word sentence in his classic book, Stuart Little.
A single sentence that is 107 words long.
Yes. And he uses it to describe the loveliest town in the world. The sentence flows endlessly, carrying the reader like a leaf on a gentle stream, past the orchards, down the roads, and up into the wide, peaceful sky. It requires meticulous attention to conjunctions and rhythm so the reader never feels out of breath. You use a long sentence to create a flowing, immersive, hypnotic river.
But then you contrast that flowing river with the shattering, brutal power of the two-word sentence. A short sentence acts as a concrete dam. It stops the river dead. The classic example is the shortest sentence in the King James Bible, Jesus wept. 2 words. But those 2 words carry the entire crushing weight of human grief and divine empathy.
Or, look at William Faulkner. At the end of his masterpiece, The Sound and the Fury, he describes the fate of Dilsey, the matriarch who has held the crumbling family together. He writes simply, "Dilsey endured." Just 2 words, but they contain generations of suffering, quiet resilience, and immense dignity. It forces the reader to stop reading, look up from the page, and just sit with the profundity of what was just said.
Whether you are writing a flowing river or a 2-word dam, you must give your sentence a finale. I really love this rule. The final word of a sentence, the one sitting right next to the period, is prime real estate. You want to push the most powerful word, usually the verb or the punchline, to the very end.
Because the period creates a mandatory, lingering pause in the reader's mind. Whatever word immediately precedes that period is going to echo in the reader's subconscious for a fraction of a second longer than any other word in the sentence. If you end on a weak prepositional phrase, the echo is weak.
Let's look at an example. If I write, "On the way to the movies, my brother got the hiccups," it lands beautifully. The final word is hiccups. That is the action, the disruption, the punchline. But if I flip it and write, "My brother got the hiccups on the way to the movies," the sentence deflates. The final echo is movies, which is just a location. It completely kills the energy.
F. Scott Fitzgerald was an absolute master of the sentence finale. Look at the iconic final line of The Great Gatsby, arguably one of the greatest sentences in American literature. "So we beat on boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past."
Into the past.
Exactly. He doesn't end on boats. He doesn't end on current. He pushes the ultimate tragedy of Jay Gatsby, his inability to escape his history, to the very last word, the past. That word hangs in the air, echoing long after you've closed the book.
Okay, so rhythm, pacing, and finales pull the listener down the river.
Right.
But what makes them actually care about the journey? What makes them want to stay in the boat? The answer is the people they meet along the way and the vividness of the world they're entering. This brings us to how we populate these carefully constructed sentences. In this episode about this book, Good Writing, 36 Ways to Improve Your Sentences by Neal and Anne Lamott, they dive into building characters and sensory experiences that earn the reader's deep subconscious trust.
And earning that trust starts with making sure your characters, whether in a novel or in narrative nonfiction, feel distinct. There is a huge danger, especially for newer writers, that all their characters will just sound like slightly different, thinly veiled versions of the author. To prevent this blurring, Allen and Lamott suggest archetyping your characters.
They suggest using systems like Jungian archetypes or the Enneagram. You identify the core psychological pattern of the person you're writing about. Is this character the helper who sacrifices themselves for others? Are they the challenger who needs to dominate every room? Are they the peacemaker who avoids conflict at all costs?
Right. Knowing their archetype tells you what their deepest fears are, what their ultimate desires are, and precisely how they will react when you throw a problem at them.
But let me ask you, if we are deliberately pulling from a list of Jungian archetypes or Enneagram numbers to build our characters, aren't we just intentionally writing cliches? Isn't that the exact opposite of original, authentic writing?
That's a brilliant distinction to make, and it's one they address directly. An archetype is not a cliche, it's a structural foundation. Think of it like a skeleton. A stereotype or a cliche is a paper cutout.
A paper cutout. Okay.
Yeah. A stereotype relies on shallow, surface-level cultural assumptions. The dumb jock, the nagging mother, the absent-minded professor, they have no interior life. But an archetype is rooted in universal, deep-seated human psychology. Every single human being on Earth operates on some archetypal level. We all have core fears and core desires.
So the archetype is the universal skeleton, but you add the unique muscles and skin to make them an individual.
Precisely. By understanding a character's deep psychological archetype, a writer can actually subvert the cliche. You take the boastful, aggressive challenger archetype, but you give them a moment of profound, quiet, devastating vulnerability regarding a stray dog.
Oh, I see.
Because you started with a universal structural truth that the archetype, the character, feels instantly recognizable to the reader's subconscious, but because you added specific, unexpected humanity, they feel infinitely real.
And the way you add that specific humanity is through sensory details. Rule 29 is smell the roses. Humans are incredibly visual creatures. We process massive amounts of data through sight. But writers often fall into the trap of only describing what things look like, completely forgetting the other four senses.
Which is a massive neurological missed opportunity. The olfactory bulb, the part of the brain that processes smell, has direct, unfiltered neural connections to the amygdala and the hippocampus, which are the areas of the brain that process emotion and memory.
So smell hits you right in the feelings.
Exactly. Sight and sound are routed differently. This is why a specific smell can instantly transport you back to your childhood kitchen in a way a photograph never could.
This is exactly why Marcel Proust didn't begin his monumental work Remembrance of Things Past by describing the visual wallpaper of his childhood bedroom. He began with the taste and the smell of a Madeleine cake dipped in linden tea. That single specific taste unlocked an entire universe of visceral memory.
Anne Lamott shares a breathtakingly simple story about this. Her young son was riding on someone's shoulders outside at night. He looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, and said, "It smells like moon."
It smells like moon. My God, you instantly, viscerally know exactly what that means. You can feel the cold, crisp, vast, slightly metallic night air in your own lungs. It completely bypasses your intellect and hits you right in the chest.
When you provide those specific, non-visual sensory details, you prove to the reader that you have actually lived in the world you are describing. You build ultimate trust.
But here's the paradox of trust. Building it also means knowing exactly what not to say. It means trusting your reader's intelligence to fill in the gaps. Readers are not passive recipients of data. They are highly imaginative pattern seekers.
Right.
If you give them three specific, telling details about a room, their brain will instantly construct the rest of the walls, the ceiling, and the dust motes in the air.
And if you over-explain every single detail of a character's backstory to justify why they are anxious, you are insulting the reader. Anne Lamott has a hilarious, furious pet peeve about this. She absolutely despises when writers, usually in thrillers or sci-fi, casually kill off their protagonist's parents in a tragic car crash early in the story just to avoid having to write their backstory.
The orphan by car crash trope.
Yes. The main character meets someone at a coffee shop, and within 2 pages they casually drop, "Oh yeah, my parents died in a multi-car pileup when I was 10.
It is such a lazy, transparent shortcut.
Yeah.
It is the author winking at the reader and saying, look, I don't have the time or the skill to map out the complex, messy family dynamics that made this person who they are, so just accept that they have trauma and let's get back to the plot.
It is the ultimate authorial cheat code. Trusting the reader means showing them the trauma through the character's current behavior, a flinch, an obsession, a refusal to commit, not just handing them a convenient police report about a car crash.
Right.
However, we have to talk about how this book actually takes a highly controversial stance on the oldest, most sacred rule in creative writing classes everywhere. Show, don't tell.
Oh, right. Every writing teacher screams, show, don't tell. But Allen and Lamott completely dispel the myth that you must only ever show. They argue for a new rule, show, then tell.
Because showing is absolutely essential for building the scene, putting the reader in the room, and letting them experience the action. But it is entirely okay and often necessary to give the reader an intellectual payoff after setting that scene. You have to synthesize the meaning for them.
They use The Great Gatsby as the ultimate example of this mastery. F. Scott Fitzgerald spends 95% of that novel showing us the world. He shows us the absurd opulence, the shirt shipped from England, the drunken parties, the careless driving, and the affairs. He immerses us in the sensory reality of the jazz age.
Yeah.
But at the very end of the book, he steps out from behind the curtain, looks directly at the reader, and tells us exactly what his moral judgment is. He writes, "They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness and let other people clean up the mess they had made."
If Fitzgerald had strictly adhered to show, don't tell, and simply shown us Tom and Daisy moving away without that final telling summary, the book might have felt like a passive, almost amoral observation of rich people misbehaving.
Right.
By stepping in and telling us his explicit moral judgment at the end, he elevates the entire narrative from a soap opera into a profound American tragedy. He gives the reader the intellectual and moral catharsis they were craving.
So you build the characters, you immerse us in the senses, you show us the messy reality of the world, and then you tell us what it all means. But doing that, building immersive, truthful worlds, inevitably leads us to hit a wall. To write truthfully, we have to confront the hardest parts of the human experience. And then we have to endure the most agonizing part of the process itself, finishing and editing.
This is where the mechanics of sentences elevate into the philosophy of living. They talk about layering your sentences. A truly great sentence shouldn't just convey a single piece of plot data. It should carry plot, character, rhythm, and deep emotion all at the exact same time.
Anne illustrates this with a harrowing story about her houseboat cat. The cat was somehow impaled by a stick. It was rushed to the vet, lungs exposed. It is a horrific, traumatic scene of chaos and blood. But she sums up the ultimate resolution of that terrifying night with a masterful, incredibly layered, 6-word sentence. "Against all odds, the cat lived."
It is so deceptively simple, but those 6 words carry the entire emotional arc of the event. The terror, the hopelessness, the grace, and the exhausted relief.
But getting to a place where you can write those 6 perfect words requires confronting things that most of us spend our lives running away from. Rule 33 is simply, write the hard stuff.
You have to confront life, death, immense loss, and the ineffable.
And honestly, for you listening right now, this feels like finally forcing yourself to open that terrifying, overstuffed closet in the hallway that you've been avoiding for a decade, the one packed with old photos, regrets, and fears. But how do you actually do it? How do you use mere language to articulate things that feel completely beyond words?
It's the great challenge of all art, isn't it? The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, who is quoted in the text, nailed this problem. He said, "The aspects of things that are most important for us are hidden because of their simplicity and familiarity."
Wow.
Right? The hard stuff isn't complex astrophysics or technical jargon. The hardest stuff to write about is our terror of death, our desperate, humiliating need for love, our crushing grief. Because they are so universal, they feel impossible to articulate newly.
When authors avoid writing about these core human terrors, they're cheating the reader. They're playing it safe in the shallow end.
But when a writer is brave enough to wade into the deep end, look at how language can stretch to capture the vastness of the soul. The authors quote Cormac McCarthy, a writer who never shied away from the ineffable. Describing men looking out at the night ocean, McCarthy wrote, "They were watching out there past men's knowing, where stars are drowning and whales ferry their vast souls through the black and seamless sea."
Where stars are drowning and whales ferry their vast souls. My God, that is language reaching its hand into the absolute dark and bringing back fire.
But to ever achieve a sentence like that, you have to do the most mundane, agonizing thing imaginable. You have to finish the damn draft.
Yes. You have to defeat the inner perfectionist who is screaming at you that your first attempt is absolute garbage and you should just quit.
Perfectionism is the enemy of completion. Anne Lamott is famous for her 3-draft process to defeat this perfectionism. First is the shitty first draft. Your only goal here is to shovel sand into a box. You let it be terrible, chaotic, and messy because its only job is to exist on the page.
Second is the tighter draft. That is where you take that pile of sand and start packing it into the shape of a sandcastle, focusing on structure, pacing, and flow. And finally, there is the dental draft.
The dental draft. It is such a painful, accurate metaphor.
I feel that in my teeth just saying it. This is where you are in there, with the tiny mirrors, the bright lights, and the sharp metal picks. You're examining every single sentence, scraping away the plaque of adverbs, checking for rot in your verbs, looking for cavities in your logic. Let's actually demonstrate this for the listener right now. Let's role-play a dental draft. Give me a terrible plaque-covered sentence.
All right, let's take this. The very tired man walked slowly into the completely dark room and said that he was sad.
Oof. Okay, that is a mouthful of cavities. Let's get the dental pick. First, the crutch words and weak adjectives. Very tired. We scraped that away. What is the Anglo-Saxon truth underneath?
Yeah.
Exhausted.
Next, the weak verb, walked slowly. That's a limp fish propped up by an adverb. Let's replace it with a muscular verb. Instead of walked slowly, let's use shuffled or trudged. Let's go with shuffled.
Okay, the exhausted man shuffled. Now the room. Completely dark room. Completely is useless clutter. Dark is fine, but we can do better. Let's use a stronger, more evocative adjective. Pitch black.
Finally, the attribution and dialogue, and said that he was sad. We are telling, not showing, and we are using a weak verb. Let's replace that entire phrase with a single sensory action that implies sadness. Sighed.
So we went from the very tired man walked slowly into the completely dark room and said that he was sad. And after the dental draft, we have the exhausted man shuffled into the pitch black room and sighed. It is tighter, punchier, and infinitely more visual.
And even after you do that exhausting dental draft yourself, you still aren't done, because then you have to hand your manuscript over to a professional. The final rule we will discuss is the necessity of worshiping talented editors.
This requires a profound vulnerability. You hand over your deathless prose, the sentences you have literally bled over, to an editor, and they return it to you covered in red ink. They cut your favorite, most clever metaphors. They tell you your pacing drags. They tell you your protagonist is annoying. It is a necessary, brutal death of the ego.
But that ego death is exactly what sets the truth of the piece free. A truly talented editor is not trying to change your voice. They are trying to remove the blind spots, the vanity, and the clutter that are obscuring your voice. They are saving you from yourself. They take your necklace, find the cracked beads you were too attached to notice, and replace them so the whole piece shines.
It is a collaborative act of stripping away the illusion to find the core message. And that is exactly what we want to challenge you, the listener, to do today. Take the ideas we've explored from this book, Good Writing, 36 Ways to Improve Your Sentences by Neal Allen and Anne Lamott, and let them actively enhance your everyday life. We challenge you. Look at the very next text message you send. Look at the next email you draft for your boss or the next presentation you build. Read it over. Do your own dental draft. Strip out all the varies. Find the weak, static to be verbs and replace them with strong, active ones. Take out the $50 Latinate words and replace them with visceral, earthy truth. Notice your own voice, whether you are a Paul, John, George, or Ringo, and amplify it fearlessly.
If you do this, I promise you, it will change how people respond to you, it will change how much they trust you, and ultimately it will change how you are understood in the world.
Absolutely. If you want to master these tools, we highly encourage you to purchase this book, Good Writing, 36 Ways to Improve Your Sentences by Neal Allen and Anne Lamott. It is literally a masterclass in communication that you can hold in your hands. We also ask you to engage with the authors, Neal Allen and Anne Lamott, on social media. Tell them which of the 36 rules blew your mind the most. And of course, thank you so much for spending time with the show today. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow, subscribe, and share the Playing Books podcast with your friends.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Earlier, we talked extensively about etymology, the deep roots of our language. Consider the etymological root of the word truth. It derives from the ancient Proto-Indo-European word for tree. Think about what that implies. Truth is not something abstract, floating ethereally in the clouds of our intellect. It is a living thing, rooted deep in the dirt and the mud of human experience. It grows incredibly slowly over time, weathering storms, and it drops leaves that eventually decay to become the fertile soil for the next generation's growth. What does that etymology say about the rootedness of the stories you choose to tell, and perhaps more importantly, the ones you choose to leave unspoken?